If you dance this tango with me, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone." Logan Whitmore's words fell into the grand Astoria ballroom like a ribbon soaked in electricity. The champagne glass in his hand shimmered beneath the crystal chandeliers. Laughter rippled from the guests, their gowns woven with light, their wrists weighed in gold like startled birds breaking free. The echo slid along the white walls, climbed the marble columns, touched the domed ceiling, then lashed back down to the floor like a soft whip. The orchestra in the corner waited bandoneon, holding its breath violin frozen mid-bow piano, resting its hands on the keys like a prayer ready to strike at command. And there, in the blur of bodies and spotlight, stood her. Ava Johnson, the black woman in a black uniform, white apron, clutched a silver tray to her chest. At soirées like this, she was used to being the shadow, gliding through clouds of expensive perfume, sidestepping, rustling hems, steadying a tilting glass. She knew how to vanish inside other people's abundance. But tonight, one sentence lit a beam that landed squarely on her, as if all the excess light in the ballroom had decided to grow an extra flare right on her face. "Ladies and gentlemen," Logan tapped his silver spoon against the rim of his glass, the metallic ting a sharp spark in the air. "Tonight, an experiment." He smiled a smile that shoved others to the edge of their comfort. "If you dance this tango with me, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone." The "oh my, no way, he's kidding" scattered like fireworks over cocktail tables. Someone raised a hand to cover a gasp. Another tilted back in laughter as if watching a street magician at work. And Ava felt her heart land one odd beat inside her chest. He walked straight toward her, polished shoes clacking against marble left hand, holding the glass right hand, flicking the air as if opening an act in a circus. "Don't be scared," Logan said, his voice wrapped in velvet. "It's just a tango. Or do you even know what a tango is? His just was thin as a string, pull too long and it would snap. But at that moment everyone believed it, steel cable strong." Laughter surged again, lighter, sharper, the laughter of those safe in the shade of wealth. Ava stood tall. Through the roar of noise, she caught something else, her own breath. A breath rising from beneath her sternum, flying through her throat, like a bird refusing to be caged. Somewhere far, or perhaps very near, a voice returned, the voice of a woman who had left this world, but never her dance with your heart, not just your feet. Isabel Moore's hand had once pressed her shoulder in a faded afternoon at Lincoln Center, the lights dimming until only their two heartbeats filled the room. "Go on, say no," a woman in green whispered from the third row. "She's going to cry," a man muttered. Ava saw mouths shaping predictions for her eyes, eager for a stumble, a dropped tray, a shard of crystal, splitting the night. She looked at the room as if it were a wind-stirred lake, ripples of laughter skimming nowhere. Then she lowered her eyes to the tray in her arms. She set it down on the nearest cocktail table. The glasses chimed a single ting, delicate as a droplet of light falling into midnight. That tiny sound split the ballroom in two. Laughter caught mid-throat, hearing itself for the first time. The bandoneon exhaled a long sigh, not music, yet just the living breath of an instrument waiting. In the corners, servers froze half a step, trays teetering, then balancing as if they'd seen someone cross an invisible threshold. Logan's grin widened. "Come on." He offered his right hand, the polished gesture anyone could see hid a needle beneath. "Let's make the night memorable." The word memorable floated, like uncorked wine, sweet, viscous, with a bite that lingered. Ava looked at that hand, a hand that snapped fingers for service, bought entire evenings, bent others' words into mockery. Then she lifted her head. She didn't answer. Her silence was not spite, not rebellion. It simply barred his words from touching her breath. She stepped forward. 1 step, 2, 3. The marble did not tremble, but the lights above dipped half a tone. From the balconies, phones rose, black mirrors trained downward like new eyes. The orchestra, like tamed beasts sensing their meal, leaned in. "A tango," Logan said, snapping his fingers. The conductor's baton lifted the air, tightened like a drawn thread. She stood there, facing him, the distance between them, the length of one steady breath. "A tango," she repeated, but only inside. Her hand extended steady. When their palms touched, something small and seismic happened. The room, with all its gilded weight, with all its voices, with everything thought to belong to others, suddenly found a heartbeat. The first notes of the bandoneon slipped out like a sigh held too long. The violin answered with a thin thread stretched above heads like a strand of light. The piano struck a dark, round chord, setting the entire room down on a low note. Logan placed his hand on Ava's back firm, as if to stamp a claim of who led. "Relax," he said, almost with a chuckle. "Just follow. Just follow 2 grains of sand in the eye, tiny but stinging." The first step, he made it grand. His heel carved a streak of light across the marble, his toe flicked up with excess, a spin engineered for an easy wow. The crowd held its breath, waiting for a stumble, a jerk of the shoulder, a tray. No, the tray was already safe, waiting for something to fall. But Ava did not fall. Her feet moved like water. Her back stood like a column that belonged to no one. Each time the violin lifted half a note, her gaze stayed steady like a star, hanging neither fierce nor sorrowful, simply bright. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "Not a server tonight," another voice said, as if they had just spotted a new horizon on an old painting. Logan lifted his hand higher, pulled her into a sharp spin. The bandoneon, sensing the man's showmanship, suddenly droned a note longer than needed, exposing every move to scrutiny. Ava tilted slightly, then returned to center. She didn't stiffen against the pull. She let it pass through her like wind running a line of trees. Leaves trembled, but trunks stood firm. He tried again, harsher a yank backward, a sudden stop. Those stops, usually unmoored people, sent feet to the wrong place. But with Ava, each stop birthed a perfectly shaped silence, then a subtle shift, like one door closing only to open another. The room, accustomed to loving grand gestures, suddenly learned how to love the small. The lift of a chin, the drop of an eyelid, the fullness of a breath. Sweat rose on Logan's forehead, beads of water curling under the lights, as if looking for a place to hide. He gripped tighter his hand, saying what his mouth dared not, "Don't step outside my lines." Ava looked straight at him. In her eyes there was no fire, no ice, only a gentle brightness, the light of someone who had practiced standing tall in rooms that were never hers, reclaiming space for breath itself. In a far corner, someone's stomach growled faintly. Strangely, that tiny sound made the entire room feel alive. Then came Logan's gamble. He pulled her back, forcing a chest-to-chest pose the drama lovers in the crowd exhaled, ready to laugh at the slip of an ankle. For a fraction of a second, the ground-tilted marble became a brazen wave eager to knock someone down. Ava closed her eyes for exactly one beat of the bandoneon, no more. When she opened them, she was standing firm on a pinpoint of floor, her simple dress spinning once in a neat circle before stopping in front of Logan so close people could count her lashes. Applause burst mid-dance. Rude, perhaps, but ruder still would have been silence in the face of beauty that had just saved someone from a collapse carefully staged. Hands clapped, first, scattered, then rolling, then crashing like surf. A fan snapped shut with a click like a shell breaking open. Champagne glasses were set down without laughter to accompany them. From the balconies above, some forgot to tilt phones vertical or horizontal, holding them only as if to steady a heartbeat. In that moment, tango was no longer a dance. It became a dialogue without translation where wealth could buy no word. The bandoneon wept. Yes, this time it wept, while the violin streaked a sharp light high above, and the piano struck a bass note like confirmation. Ava stepped half a pace so slight only those who knew rhythm could catch it, and Logan retreated half a step inadvertently, like dodging a bird swooping between them. Ava, someone whispered, not calling, just recognizing a name that already belonged to legend. Who taught her? A silver-haired man clenched his handkerchief eyes, dropping in an emotion too swift to name. The room no longer craved laughter, it craved truth. And the truth stood plain before them. A woman had set down a tray to lift an entire ballroom with steady hands. The final passage arrived unhurried. Notes stretched long, dragging the air itself into slowness. Logan opened his mouth perhaps to toss out a joke, perhaps a tease, but then closed it. There was no room for stray words. Ava tilted her head, placed her hand precisely where his required nothing more, nothing less. When the last chord fell, it did not crash. It lingered suspended, a filament of light so fine that a single strong breath might have snapped it. No one breathed hard. The entire room froze, even the glasses stood still. For one rare moment, the noise of a great city car horns whined through alleys. Voices calling from the street seemed to retreat a step, leaving space for a silence that spoke. Ava stood there, breath high in her chest, cheeks flushed, eyes carrying a light no lamp could give. And within that silence, when it seemed everything had already been said, a voice, old, warm, and clear, rose from the front row. She is not a stranger. But that was the story of the next second. In this one, the ballroom was still learning how to place a hand on its chest and know that just now something had replaced its heart with a different rhythm. She is not a stranger. The old man's voice rose from the front row, round and clear, like a bell freshly wiped of dust. Every head in the hall turned. He stood, his silver hair like strands of light, a white handkerchief in his breast pocket, like a small dove. Harold Bennett. The name alone made several faces on the balcony, straightened the patron of the arts whose signature had carried entire seasons in New York. He stepped forward half a beat unhurried, as if afraid to snap the last thread of silence holding the room. She is the daughter of Isabel Moore, he said, his eyes fixed on Ava. I saw it in her turns, in the way she held the frame with her heart. I watched her mother dance at Lincoln Center many years ago. Tonight, that flame has returned. The words Isabel Moore fell like a bass note everyone already knew. A few hands rose to cover mouths. Those who once sat in the high seats looking down at the tilted light of the stage suddenly felt salt in their throats. Ava stood still, her eyes holding the light steady, suddenly wet, as if a soft rain had just passed. She drew a breath deep, then nodded very slightly. Yes, she said, voice gentle but steady. I am her daughter. No one clapped. The silence lingered as if the name itself needed a place to rest. Then Harold moved a few steps closer, stopping at a distance proper with respect. Your mother, he said, danced as though every note was a word of forgiveness for the world. He turned to the crowd. And tonight we witnessed that forgiveness spoken in a language without translation. His eyes returned to Ava. Thank you for not letting that flame die. Ava touched her fingers together as though brushing against an old photograph. My mother left too soon. She whispered her words, not rising past the rim of her own voice, yet heard by all because the room was listening with its heart. I left the stage because every time music played I felt I was standing in an empty room, hearing only her shoes somewhere out of reach. She looked down at the marble floor as though through mist. I chose a uniform. I chose silence. I thought if I stopped touching music, the pain would stop echoing. An elderly woman moments ago, intent on smiling, wiped her eyes with the back of a jeweled hand. At the room's edges, servers halted their trays, tilted like slender new moons. And so, the private story of one young woman slowly found its seat inside the collective story of a city. Logan Whitmore had been standing a few steps away, caught between two invisible walls. His tuxedo was crisp, his pocket square still precise, but his face showed a fatigue he had never learned to hide. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again, searching for a smile, fragile enough not to break. "Well," he said, forcing a lightness perhaps. "Fate arranged our meeting this way." The word fate slipped from his lips like a gambler's coin, shiny but worth nothing at this table. Harold tilted his head, his gaze darkening. The orchestra lowered their bows to their laps like arms caught mid-thought. Ava looked at Logan, not in anger, not in softness, just the look of someone who had long stood in heavy winds without bending. "Mr. Bennett," she said softly. Her voice turned back toward the old man. "Thank you for speaking my mother's name like a prayer." Then she turned to the crowd. "If I danced tonight," she said, "I danced for her, and for the truth that sometimes to keep living we must hold silence the way we hold breath." A single hand clapped at the back of the hall clap. Then another, then a scattering, then suddenly the Grand Astoria ballroom rose to its feet in applause. Not thunderous, solemn. It was not the applause for entertainment, it was the amen at the end of a hymn. Ava bowed her head, tears falling sweet as the first rain of the season. In the corner, the janitor from the night before, nameless to most guests, set down his mop and clapped with rough hands, his eyes shining like freshly cleaned glass. "Bravo," someone said, not in English, not in Spanish, but in that single syllable the world shares when beauty and truth stand together. Logan stood frozen, his hands open, not knowing where to place them. Almost at that moment the music returned. Not another tango, but a melody, soft as a tablecloth being laid down, settling everything back into place. Ava drew in a breath, clear and full, and as she exhaled her shoulders lowered by an inch, as though she had just taken off an invisible armor. "Sorry," Logan said this time, looking straight at Ava. The word slipped from his mouth like something he had never practiced saying, catching awkwardly on the edge of his tongue. I didn't mean to offend you. He searched for the other half of his sentence among the countless eyes fixed on him. "I was wrong about the way." A woman in a red dress, who had stayed behind the safe line of laughter earlier, suddenly let out a dry breath. The way she echoed, as though testing a new garment with her fingertips. In the front row, Harold said nothing, his silence now like the doormat before a door you could step inside, but only if you removed your shoes. Ava didn't leave him waiting long. "Forgiveness," she said, voice neither high nor low, "is not a cloth to wipe down the pride on your face, Logan." His name in her mouth sounded like an object finally set on its rightful shelf. Forgiveness is an act of truth. The room exchanged an invisible glance. Those who knew nodded. Those just learning stayed quiet. "If one day you change," Ava continued, "let it be for yourself, not for the mirror of an evening drowned in lights. But Logan faltered, as though walking across a wooden floor eaten through by termites, never sure which plank would hold. "Maybe I misspoke. I want to make it up to you." The phrase "make it up" landed as lightly as a check. It found no footing in this room. To the right, the silver-haired lady who had wiped tears with the back of her jeweled hand earlier stepped fully forward. "Tonight," she said, "we did not come to watch you buy something else." She lifted her hand, pointing toward Ava with a gesture as delicate as touching the rim of a glass. "We came to remember that some things cannot be bought." Harold cleared his throat softly, like tugging a bell cord. "Logan," he said, calling the young man by name for the first time, "you know how to sign contracts." "Good." But there are contracts that don't move by ink. They move by the way you stand in a room like this. He stepped back half a pace, returning the stage to the young pair with an old man's gesture. The orchestra held still, their bows frozen like doors, left barely ajar. Ava glanced around the hall. The chandeliers no longer glittered like treasure. They glowed like stars, beautiful, because everyone could see them. "I hold no grudge," she said, "but I will not step back into your game again." Her words were light, like a small key unlocking a vast door. At the far end, someone began to cry, hurried tears quickly stifled like a candle holder trembling. Logan bowed his head not to search for a lost button but to acknowledge that this floor did not belong to him alone. Applause surged, not solemn now but blazing like fire. People called her name Ava, not shouted, called, as if calling someone home after a long journey. Ava smiled a smile that softened even the sharp edges of marble. She turned to Harold, bowed in thanks, then looked toward the servers leaning in the shadows, their white aprons brighter than before. She lifted her hand, a gesture like giving the room back its light. Only then did the music return, a gentle melody, with no ambition to tell another story, only to lay down the final cloth on the table. Ava stepped back once, then again, like someone withdrawing from a painting so it could hang by itself. Logan remained where he was, hands hanging loose, staring at the shadow beneath him. Perhaps for the first time, he saw that shadow was not as tall as he imagined. Harold turned, passing his handkerchief to a young woman nearby, like an heirloom, then let out a long breath only his neighbor could hear. As Ava walked toward the door, the applause followed her steady and strong like the wheels of a train crossing a bridge. The doors opened to a draft of night air carrying the scent of the street, a far-off horn, the damp trace of old rain on the pavement. She paused, turned back for one last look at the room. "Mother," she whispered inside herself. I danced, and somewhere deep within the wooden ribs and steel reeds of the bandoneon, a faint sound rose like an answer I hear. The corridor behind the kitchen was cool as an underground river. Air conditioning gusted through the swinging doors, carrying with it the minty scent of hand soap, the clean metallic tang of steel trays, and a trace of sweetness left from desserts. Ava leaned back against the white-painted brick wall, her hands light now, as if they had never known the weight of a tray. The hurried footsteps of staff slowed when they saw her, their eyes accustomed to bowing before guests lifted instead like people suddenly discovering their balcony overlooked a wider sky. "Girl." Marcia. The banquet captain lowered her voice, her round brown eyes glistening. "You made the whole room go silent." The words fell over Ava like a warm towel placed on shoulders just freed from armor. Joey, the curly-haired dishwasher, lifted his soapy wet hands high, the way someone claps when they know their touch could stain anything, then lowered them again, grinning, his crooked tooth flashing. "You brought your mama back, didn't you?" Ava smiled. "No, she never left." She spoke softly, as if to her own shadow, yet the hallway heard it. A door opened gently. Harold Bennett appeared, the white handkerchief in his pocket like a bird that had just landed. He didn't walk all the way, in stopping close enough that his words didn't have to fight the air. "Forgive me for intruding," he said, his voice old but warm. "But I wanted to offer you something, not an invitation. Think of it as an empty space." From his inside pocket he drew a cream envelope, neither thick nor thin. "Lincoln Center," he said, "has nights dedicated to memory. If you ever wish, we will light a lamp for Isabel Moore. Not to sell tickets, to let those who once heard her footsteps and those who never did stand together in a beautiful silence." He didn't hand it to her like a check. He set it on the wall within her reach, like placing a teacup near someone in tears. Ava looked at the envelope as though it were a window between two seasons. "Thank you," she said. Tonight I finally found the courage to say her name aloud among strangers. Harold nodded. Courage is when you set a tray down. He smiled, the wrinkles by his eyes folding into gentle waves. "Leave the envelope here. It won't run away." From afar, the applause still echoed, not thunderous anymore, but steady, like the wheels of a train crossing a bridge. Marcia pressed a small item into Ava's hand, a black, fabric-covered hairpin. "Your mama probably hated messy hair," she teased softly. Ava tucked it into her bun, suddenly feeling the weight of memory settle onto her head. At the end of the corridor, Logan Whitmore stopped like a man lost from his own map. His tuxedo still crisp, but his shoulders had sunk a notch. He looked at Ava from a distance far enough not to threaten, close enough to hear the hum of the air vents. "Ava," he said, dropping her name like a pebble into water. The pebble hit bottom. I don't know what words could make what just happened less wrong. He swallowed hard. I grew up in rooms that believed laughter could buy everything. He lifted his gaze for the first time, not borrowing light from chandeliers. "You just taught me the opposite." No one spoke for him. No rebuke, no pat on the shoulder. The absence of an audience of cameras of applause itself straightened the mirror in front of him. "I'll turn my apology into something with shape," he said, not a grand promise, not naming it. "Not tonight. But I'll learn not to stand in a room like a blind man." He stepped back, yielding space to the flow of people. "Thank you for not letting me purchase your silence." Ava nodded. "Silence isn't for sale," she said softly, "but anyone can learn to hear it." She picked up the envelope, not opening it. "And this, another day. Tonight, I want to walk home in my old shoes." Harold smiled, lifting his hand in blessing. "Old shoes know the way." Ava walked. The back door opened to a slice of New York rain lingering on the pavement, a horn threading between buildings, a bicycle cutting by like a sudden bar of music. At the corner, an old Argentine man cradled a bandoneon, the first note springing out as she passed, not for tips, but because someone had just stepped out of a song. Ava paused, half a beat, dropped a bill into the ragged fabric box. The old man looked up, his brown eyes deep as an ancient well. "Para tu madre," he murmured. Ava nodded. For every mother she replied, and night, like a cloth, draped gently over all that needed to rest. In the grand hall, after Ava had gone, the grand Astoria ballroom felt like a great beast robbed of its roar, not fiercer, only gentler. The chandeliers still glowed, but their light no longer flaunted it, softened like the pale white of morning rather than the gold of spectacle. Guests stood in small clusters. Their voices no longer glittered with show, but dimmed into the hush of people talking in a church after Mass. On the bandstand, the conductor laid his baton down, smoothing a silver strand of hair behind his ear, like a man who had just seen off a procession no one had rehearsed. Harold Bennett stepped back into the center of the room, raising no hand for silence. For silence was already there. "Tonight," he said, "we take home a lesson that needs no frame." He lifted a glass of water, not champagne. To Isabel Moore, who taught New York to dance with its heart. To Ava Johnson, who taught us to be silent with dignity. And to a city that sometimes forgets how to listen. Glasses were lifted not out of politeness, but because leaving them down would leave the hands empty. At the edge of the room, Logan didn't raise a glass. He stood beside a marble column, hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man sketching himself for the first time. The woman in the red dress approached her, smile no longer hiding blades. "Young man," she said, "some nights we pay with laughter. Tonight you paid with your own silence. That's enough. Don't ask for change." She touched his arm, a mother's pat for a child who'd finally found the way home, after wandering too far. Whitmore, a male voice called from behind Grant, the investment partner, whose tone usually sparkled like fresh wine. The press wants the story. Logan turned. Let them write about Ava. He paused, learning how to place a period. If they ask about me, tell them I learned something, and no photos. Grant stared startled, as though hearing an instrument long off key suddenly fall into rhythm. All right, he said, then stepped back into the murmur. As the crowd thinned, Marcia dared to walk into the center aisles, sweeping across the marble floor, now empty of shoes. She bent and picked up a strip of black ribbon fallen from someone's hair and tucked it into her apron pocket like pocketing a scrap of night. Tomorrow, she murmured to herself, I'll tape a note in the staff lounge, no one is invisible. It sounded like a textbook phrase, but tonight it deserved an A5 sheet and a roll of tape. Elsewhere, Harold scribbled a few hurried lines inside a program Ava don't rush to answer about Lincoln. Memory isn't hungry. When you're ready, just knock. HB. He handed the card to Joey. Son, you run faster than I do. Next time you see her, give this to her. Joey nodded, his grin splitting open like warm bread. On the steps leading to the street, Logan paused before the glass wall, staring at the reflection of a well-dressed man standing alone. Behind the glass lay the room he once thought belonged to him. No, he said to his reflection, not denying the room but refusing an old habit. I'll learn to stand where there is no light. The words weren't a vow of noble suffering. They were simply a beginning, like a pianist setting a finger on the first note, knowing the road ahead was long. Outside, New York hummed like a night symphony horns. Wheels, short shouts, a dog barking far off, and very, very faintly, a bandoneon phrase crossing an intersection before vanishing. Ava walked inside that music, her old shoes fitting the pavement like greeting a friend. She stopped before the darkened window of a small shoe store, gazing at a pair of soft burgundy dance shoes resting in the glass. Not tonight, she said to them, but soon. She took the long way home through a park where the trees bent black under the streetlights like unfinished lines of a script. On a bench, an old woman slept, clutching a canvas bag. Ava slipped a supermarket gift card inside, enough for a week of warm meals. For the days you need a cup of tea, she whispered. She lifted her face, letting the night scatter a few fine drops onto her cheek. Mother, she said inwardly, I don't hide anymore. And the answer came not in words, but in the sensation of a familiar hand on her back, steadying her over a step. That night, many in that ballroom slept late. The woman in red dropped a glittering gown into a donation box, picturing a girl wearing it on her important day. Grant searched his contacts, sending an email to a street dance scholarship fund. Marcia wrote a long, unsent message to her 14-year-old daughter. If someone laughs at you, see if you laugh with them. If not, don't give them your laughter. And Logan, for the first time in years, switched off his bedroom light before checking his phone. In the dark, he let a sigh run its full course, not cut short, not rushed, until it dissolved softly like sea foam. By morning, newspapers and social media exploded with headline snapshots, blurry clips, tangled captions. Some tried to spin it toward laughter, some toward scandal. But strangely, the image most shared was not Ava's spinning turn, but the blurry frame where she set the tray down. People typed beneath it, "This is the moment." Not where she danced, but where she chose to dance. And somewhere, in an ordinary mailbox tucked between grocery ads and bills, a cream envelope lay quietly. Ava set it on her kitchen table beside a small glass holding a single daisy. She brewed tea, the mint steam rising like a gentle prelude. She did not open the envelope, memory isn't hungry, as Harold said, but she opened the window, letting morning air flood in the way one opens music before dancing. Not for the neighbors, but so the room itself remembers its heartbeat. Across the city, an old Argentine man folded up his bandoneon, stroking its cracked leather as one strokes the back of a loyal animal. He thought of the black woman from the night before, of the way she nodded as if greeting an old song, then thought of the mothers who never abandoned their children in music. Smiling, he closed the case and walked the half-wakened streets, leaving behind a fragrance of music so faint only the attentive could hear it. Last night, New York learned a new tango, not the one rehearsed in mirrored studios, but the one that begins by setting a tray down, taking a step, then another, until you arrive exactly where silence needs to stand. And when silence can stand everything else, money-bragging, borrowed laughter falls back, making room for something simple and rare, dignity, speaking in the rhythm of a heartbeat. Morning opened like a thin page. Light entered Ava's small apartment, unhurried, slipping through the curtains like gentle fingers. On the kitchen table, the cream envelope rested beside a steaming cup of mint tea, a small cloud reluctant to drift away. In the corner, an old cardboard box had been pulled from under the bed, the kind one always says I'll deal with later. Ava sat on the wooden floor, lifted the lid as though opening a door into the lower chambers of memory. Inside a pair of soft burgundy dance shoes, their heels worn by a seasoned circle. An old ticket stub corner torn Lincoln Center from some autumn, faded to the color of tea. A photo of Isabel Moore, bowing hair in a bun neckline, straight as a ruled line. A quarter-folded note, slanted handwriting, blue ink now, pale dance with your heart, not just your feet. The period at the end round as a pebble, still warm from the hand that placed it. Ava slipped her feet into the old shoes, the familiar feel rushing up her bones like a brown bird beating homeward. She stood before the small mirror on the wall, misted slightly by tea steam, and wiped it clear with her palm. Across the silence of the apartment came the city's music milk trucks, rumbling hurried footsteps. A dog's bark sketched across the street like a passing stroke. Ava pressed 2 fingers to her sternum, found the rhythm, breathed in, breathed out so lightly the reflection only trembled. The room wasn't wide enough for a full spin, but it allowed a half step, then another. She danced her own tanda, walking close to the floor axis, steady eyes resting on a point only she knew. No music. The music was inside her like a pulse. As her foot turned a small pivot, light turned with it, leaving a faint circle like a moon halo. At the window, a little girl with twin buns, her neighbor Naomi, peeked through the curtain. "Miss Ava, are you dancing?" Ava smiled, nodding gently as if to a silent beat. "Want to hear music?" She turned on the old radio low, the bandoneon creeping into the room like a cat that knew the way. "Can you teach me a step?" Naomi, in sneakers-striped socks, school bag on one shoulder, stood waiting like a leaf for wind. Ava placed the girl's hand on her arm. "No rush," she said. "We listen first." They traced a short path across the wood floor, the child's shoes tapping softly, like syllables of a memorized poem. Naomi giggled. "I feel my heart walking in my shoes." Ava laughed, too. "That's right." The phone buzzed. Messages poured in, interview requests, invitations to retell last night attempts to turn silence into noise. Ava set the phone down, screen face down on the table. Silence isn't for sale. She had said it last night, and this morning she practiced holding its price. The doorbell rang. Marcia stood outside carrying a brown paper bag, the smell of waffles spilling out like a greeting. "Breakfast," she said, setting it down, her eyes roaming the tidy apartment, like a mother checking if the windows were shut and the stove off. "Did you open the envelope yet?" Ava shook her head. "No. I think I have to let my heart make a full circle first." Marcia nodded, then let it. They ate waffles with their hands, sipped hot tea, listened to the small radio whisper like a friend. Marcia told her that Joey hadn't slept, that he had spent the night searching YouTube for old Isabel Moore clips, then sent them into the staff group chat, until even the head chef joined and fell quiet, as though realizing for the first time that dessert also needs a prelude. Ava listened, like listening to someone else's story that still had a place inside her. After Marcia left, Ava put on a light coat, slipped the old shoes into a canvas bag, and went out. Morning New York was the color of cafe au lait wet streets, bus exhaust, pedestrians in knit caps, diners playing music, flower shops showing buckets full of daisies and roses. She crossed a small park, turned down an alley with a faded silver sign, Uptown Arts Center. The old doorman pushed open the glass door. "Isabel's girl," he began, then corrected himself. "Isabel's daughter." He pointed upstairs. "Room B, mirrors are old, but the light is good." Room B opened with a good kind of dust, the kind from old wood sweat dried into salt laughter sunk beneath piano frames. Ava flicked the switch. The lamp crackled once, then glowed the floor's wood grain, running like the lines of a palm. She set her bag on a chair, pulled out the shoes, laced them tight. The walls held black and white photos, nameless dancers' embraces framed by light from a time few remembered. Ava placed her palm against the mirror, her hand meeting its reflection like two riverbanks touching after a dry season. She began to walk. No one counting. No one scoring. The bandoneon from the radio in her bag spilled out slowly, a note stretched like a thread stitching a tear. Ava stepped through the dust of memory without catching any on her feet. Each step, an old sentence, each pivot, a new line of poetry. When she stopped, no applause came, but the room exhaled a faint shh, like someone finishing a sorrow. Before leaving, Ava wrote with a brush pen on an A4 sheet taped by the door, "If you enter here to dance, leave outside the laughter that can be bought." She signed it AJ. Not so others would know, but so that when she returned, she'd see her own reminder. Outside, Ava crossed the street. The Argentine old man from last night sat on another corner bandoneon on his lap, his small dog curled like a bun at his feet. He looked up when he saw her, a smile pinned in the air. "Para tu madre," he said again. Ova nodded this time without reply. He played a short phrase, only 3 notes enough to make passers-by turn, thinking they'd heard their own name. Back home, Ava placed the shoes on the shelf. She poured more tea. Then she drew the cream envelope toward her fingers, brushing the seal as if feeling for a bell rope. She opened it. Inside was no invitation, no contract, no schedule. Only a white card with a thin graphite border, a single line in the center. "Memory needs a quiet room." Below it, the neat signature HB and a handwritten phone number without a name. Ava smiled. "That's true," she said to the room. "And sometimes that room is your own chest." Her phone buzzed again. A message from an unfamiliar number. "If you want No, I don't know how to say it right. Only this, if you ever need someone to stand outside the room and guard your silence, I can. Signed LW, Ava set the phone down. No reply, no need for right today. She opened the window, let the morning wind sweep in, carrying the scent of sunlight. In that sunlight, she could hear her mother's footsteps on a wooden floor far away and very near. At noon, the city raised its voice. Cafes laid out brown paper on their tables. Forks and knives clinked like summer insects. The lunch news on the wall-mounted TV replayed blurred images of last night applause, a swirl of fabric, a tray being set down. The headline scrolled below a night at the Astoria when a tango changed who was watching. The waitress switched the channel. "Not while eating things that make the heart tremble," she said, smiling. Ava passed by, heard her, and smiled too. At the Grand Astoria, management gathered in a glass-walled room flooded with light. Marcia sat in the back row, clutching a small notebook, not part of the meeting, just listening. On the screen, Grant mapped out a media crisis with arrows and colored bars. Logan sat silent. No tapping pens, no whispered asides. When the agenda reached message direction, Grant asked, "Do we highlight lesson learn?" Logan shook his head. "Don't highlight me," he said. "Highlight Ava and people like her." HR tilted her head. "Internal policy." Logan looked through the glass at the grand hall where last night's chandeliers had cast light onto shoulders. "Start in the staff lounge," he said. "Start by hanging a board. No one is invisible. And start with wages." The words hit the table like an unpolished stone. Eyes turned. Grant cleared his throat softly. "All right." This time, no sarcastic laughter followed. Harold Bennett spent the afternoon on the phone. The old names in his address book, people who once stood in light now, only in sun answered in voices weathered by seasons. I remember Isabel. I still have her silk scarf. We should hold a night, but not a gala. Harold scribbled notes, one column, possible another. Better left quiet. He paused at the name Rosalind, who had once taught free beginner classes in a church basement. Note, ask Rosalind about the small room behind the stage, the one that still holds the echo of footsteps. By late afternoon, Harold arrived at Uptown Arts Center. The old doorman raised his brows, recognizing a man finding his way back. Harold stepped into room B where the taped sign, "If you enter to dance," was still drying. He stood alone a while, not switching on the lights, letting his eyes adjust to the kind of light anyone could buy but few chose to notice. He placed his white handkerchief on a chair like leaving an unaddressed letter. On his way out, he stopped at the taped note, read it slowly, nodded, then smiled. "That's right, girl." Night fell, and New York lit itself in strips like carp surfacing from water. Ava walked toward Riverside Park, her hand brushing the iron railing, punched with round holes like musical notes. Joggers passed their shirt sails lifted by wind. On the steps facing the river, a group of kids blasted hip-hop from a Bluetooth speaker, their sneakers striking sparks on concrete. Ava watched, then unconsciously took half a step, shoulders loose, eyes smiling. A girl with fine braids stopped mid-dance. "You don't dance." Ava shook her head. "I just listen." The girl shrugged. "Listening is dancing too." The words melted like candy on the tongue. Her phone buzzed. A new email. "Dear Miss Johnson, my name is Rosalind. I used to teach with your mother once long ago in a small room behind the stage at St. Bartholomew's. The room is still there. If you ever wish to visit, I keep the key." Ava read it again, her chest tightening at the words, "I keep the key," like a ring of keys turning inside her. She replied simply, "I would like to come. Not a crowd. Just the room. Send." The western sky deepened violet city lights, dragging long gold threads down a black cloth. Across the city, Logan stood before the door of a ground-floor studio, its wooden sign, handwritten, "Community Dance, Pay What You Can." He hesitated. No one knew he was here, no cameras, no press releases. He pushed the door open. The warm smell of wood floors and honest sweat met him like an embrace that asked no name. Class was about to begin a scatter of ages posture shoes. The instructor, a short salt-and-pepper man, nodded, pointing him to a spot at the back. "Newcomer," he said. "Stand there, first listen." Logan stood still. For the first time in years, he let himself be in a room he hadn't paid for finding a place to hear. When the music began, he didn't understand much, but he knew at least one thing: the first step should never fall into laughter. Late at night, Harold received a message from Ava. "Memory needs a quiet room. I chose one." He closed his eyes, leaned back in his chair, listening to the slow tick of the wall clock. He saw Isabel again in a rehearsal. Long ago, a woman with a back straight as a verse, eyes dark as a rain-fed lake. He whispered softly, afraid to wake a spirit already resting. "We won't hold a gala. We'll open a room." Before sleep, Ava opened her window. Night wind came in, carrying river scent and faint music from afar. She placed her shoes on the sill like 2 sentries, then turned off the light. In the dark, she heard a phrase from very far, very near. "No one is invisible." She didn't know if it came from the boardroom, from an A5 note somewhere, or from her own heart. She only knew that tomorrow morning when her feet touched the floor would know her name. And somewhere across the city rooms were changing tempo, a staff lounge with a new motto taped to the wall. Room B at the Arts Center keeping its good dust for those who need it. A church back room waiting for a key to turn. A ground floor studio teaching people to stand tall. A glass boardroom reflecting less, counting fewer glasses and guests. And at the center of them all a space without walls, where spoken words and unsaid ones sit down together in silence. There, a mother places her hand on her daughter's back, and a daughter places her hand on her heart enough for an entire city to remember how to breathe. Evening sagged like a thin cloth as Ava stood before the dark wooden door of St. Bartholomew's. On the steps, yellow leaves clung to cracks in the stone like words unread. She texted, "I'm here." A moment later, the door creaked open, the hinge exhaling something very old. A small framed woman with silver hair, bright eyes behind thin-rimmed glasses appeared with a jangling ring of keys. "Rosalind." "The room is behind the stage," she said, her voice like a still warm cup of tea. "It knows how to keep quiet." They walked through a narrow corridor, plaster walls freckled like late stars, past a velvet curtain worn at the edges, into a square room with a large mirror dulled at its corners, a practice barre running along one wall, and a wooden floor etched with bright scratches from many seasons of shoes. The faint smell of rosin lingered like incense. The dry wood carried the stem of an old flower. In the corner, a tin cabinet bore a brittle note. "Keep the room quiet." Rosalind set the keys on the table and held out a thin, smoky silk scarf. "Isabel's," she said. "She left it after a rehearsal. I kept it waiting for someone to need it." Ava received the scarf with both hands, as if cradling a bird just landed. The silk touched her neck, cold for a second, then warm. She looked at herself in the mirror not for beauty, but to see if the woman there could breathe as she wished. "My mother used to teach here," she asked. Rosalind smiled. She didn't teach much, she reminded. She said, "Forgiveness is where you place your breath before you step." Rosalind pointed to a section of floor worn more than the rest. "Here, many breaths have been placed." The room hushed. Hushed as though every sound feared to drop a bead of memory. Ava laced her shoes, the knots tightening at her ankles like small promises. She laid her phone face down on the table like last night. She set down the white server's napkin, still in her pocket, small as a cloud beside it, like a comma after a long sentence. Setting things down a ritual that had taught her more than any lesson. "Let me leave you," Rosalind said. "The room needs you alone." She pulled the door shut, the latch whispering like a blade of wind. Ava stood in the center, arms loose with gravity eyes resting on the seam between 2 planks. She inhaled until she could hear the breath. Exhaled until she could hear it go. No music. Then music came not from a speaker, not from a radio, but from within. A bandoneon phrase, thin as thread, slipped into her bones, snagging on hidden nails in the wood. She stepped. A caminata close to the floor toes gliding like strokes of a brush, heels striking just as her heart changed color. Shoulders released. Eyes sought no one. At every pause, she reset her breath like a cup of tea replaced gently on its saucer, so as not to wake what had cooled. A church bell tolled above somewhere unhurried, unpressing. Ava let the sound flow through her like a river, tunneling under earth. She turned once a pivot, soft as a closing door, the silk scarf at her neck trembling more than she did. The mirror reflected a woman in white light, seeking no spotlight, asking for no gaze. At its edge stood a familiar silhouette, Isabel, her back straight, one hand lowered, as if telling a guard to open the gate. "Dance with your heart." The phrase stopped halfway, the rest no longer needed. She remembered last night's tray like a small silver planet laid down in the dark, and understood for years she had carried an invisible tray. Each just joking laugh was another glass piled on. And in the instant she set it down, her fingers relearned how to hold something not called work, her own heartbeat. The door cracked open. Rosalind poked her head in, only to place a water bottle and a sheet of paper on the table before slipping out again, disturbing nothing. Ava picked it up, a hand-drawn map, walking directions from here to Lincoln Center, through 3 quiet streets, a park with jacarandas and a cafe that played no music in the afternoon. Below, 3 slanted words: "Follow your breath." Ava unlaced her shoes, setting them side by side like 2 fish resting on shore. She opened the door, stepped into the hall. Rosalind leaned on the wall keys in her arms like a bundle of bells. "Thank you," Ava said. The room spoke. Rosalind nodded. A good room will always speak in silence. She hesitated, then added, "If you want, I have a spare key. This room doesn't need reservations." They stepped onto the porch. Dusk tilted down. Across the street, a man stood under a tree, hands in his pockets, staring at the soup kitchen sign posted on the church wall as if reading a poem. Ava recognized Logan. He didn't see her, or saw, but didn't approach. Instead, he slipped through the side door. Minutes later, he emerged in a paper apron, standing in line passing hot soup trays from the steel counter into waiting hands. No cameras, no applause, no need. Ava watched a moment, then turned away. The right thing rarely makes noise. She followed Rosalind's map through a park where children blew soap bubbles that burst into soft rain. Along a street of second-hand bookshops, covers faded like butterflies. To the steps of Lincoln Center. The fountain in the plaza still sang its song, not loud, not faint. Ava sat on the stone steps, a scarf slipping slightly from her neck. Passers-by hardly noticed her. A young woman sitting still at dusk. She imagined Isabel stepping out from backstage, booing, listening to the silence of the hall, vast as an ocean. "Memory needs a quiet room," Harold had written. Sometimes that room is as wide as a square, sometimes as small as a palm. Darkness arrived. Across the street, an Argentine old man opened his case bandoneon, releasing its first 3 notes like a greeting to the moon. Ava found herself answering with the smallest nod. And in that nod, she knew tomorrow night she would unlock another door, the one that leads those who had stumbled into laughter back toward silence. No posters, no red carpet, no gala. Just a white sheet of paper taped to the wooden door of St. Bartholomew's. Tonight the room will be open. If you come, please bring your quiet. Beneath it, 2 small signatures, HB and R. The door opened at an hour when the city had softened. People arrived one by one in pairs, Marcia carrying a box of butter cookies, Joey with a new dish rag tucked into his back pocket like a charm. The woman in the red dress from the other night now in a gray coat empty-handed. Naomi holding her mother's hand, eyes round as a question. The old Argentine man with his bandoneon, the little dog trailing like a rest note. At the center of the room sat a low table with a silver tray, not for glasses but for setting things down. Everyone who entered quietly placed something on it. Marcia, her staff name tag, Joey, his worn dish glove, the woman in gray a strip of glittering ribbon, Naomi, her star-shaped hair clip, the old man a tiny silver charm, Harold his white handkerchief, and Ava, she placed the A4 sheet that read, "No one is invisible," which Marcia had sent her from the staff break room. Each object was an exhale a suitcase made lighter. There was no opening speech. Rosalind simply nodded like the keeper of a garden that knows its own path. The Argentine sat low with his bandoneon. He didn't look at anyone, only at the latches, like the eyes of a loyal creature. A squeeze, and the first breath of music passed through the room like a thin breeze opening a window. No applause, no microphone stand. Ava stepped into the middle. No ceremonial boo, only the quiet lowering of the head one gives when entering their own home. She tied her shoes' knots snug at her ankles. Isabel's silk scarf rested on her neck like a necklace that needed no gold. Her toe touched the floor, a very soft hello before she stood tall. A short tanda as short as a prayer. A slow caminata pausing at the bandoneon's breath. Turns just enough that the mirror needn't chase her, eyes seeking no one, only holding light. Each breath set down like placing a grain of rice into storage enough for the season to come. From the corner, Naomi watched without blinking, lips parted as if whispering along. Marcia forgot to chew the butter cookie dissolving on her tongue. The gray-coated woman touched her throat as though reaching for a necklace she had lost long ago. Joey clenched the rag in his pocket, recalling the marble floor that night, and realizing why one wipe in rhythm could be as beautiful as a note of music. Harold looked at his hands shakier than before and smiled, knowing that trembling too was a kind of rhythm. The final phrase came. Ava stopped inside one breath. No flourish, no spin, she simply stopped, like answering a question that had followed her for years. The bandoneon folded its last note, as though closing a letter. The room held still for one long second. Then a single clap broke, not to shatter the silence, but to lay it down gently. Applause spread light like rain on a thin roof. Ava bowed her head. She unfastened her shoes, set them side by side at the mirror's edge, touched the silver tray, her finger brushing the "No one is invisible" page, then looked up. "I won't speak tonight," she said softly, "because the room has spoken." She looked at them all. "Thank you for bringing your silence." Harold stepped forward half a pace. "This night," he said, "doesn't close. It opens a door." He turned toward the entrance. "This room will remain open whenever someone needs it. No schedule, no tickets. If you enter, leave your borrowed laughter outside." He glanced at Rosalind, who nodded her ring of keys, chiming faintly like sleepy fireworks. People left slowly. Before stepping out, each retrieved their item from the tray, but not to carry it the same way. They held it differently. Marcia pinned her name tag back on like a medal for guarding silence. Joey slipped his glove away like a flag, knowing when to fall. The woman in gray tied the ribbon around her wrist, light a reminder she didn't need sparkle to be seen. Ava folded the A4 sheet in half and slipped it into her pocket, words now woven into breath. On the porch, Logan stood partly hidden on the steps, empty-handed in a plain coat. He didn't go in. He had kept silence as promised in his clumsy message. As people exited, he greeted each with a nod, unborrowed from the spotlight. Marcia passed, lifting one finger as if to say, "Good." Harold approached, not with a handshake, but with words, "You stood in the right place." Logan nodded. "I'm trying to learn. Learning slow is still learning," Harold answered. The night outside drifted like unscored music. On the corner, the Argentine played a short farewell phrase. Naomi hopped a tiny step on the sidewalk, still holding her mother's hand, but the rhythm already her own. Ava wrapped the silk scarf again around her neck, carried her shoes in a cloth bag, and felt light, not as if floating, but as if she finally knew where weight belonged. The next morning, the Grand Astoria pinned a sheet inside the staff break room, bold black letters on white. No one is invisible beneath it. 3 small lines. Base pay adjusted, starting next month. Fair scheduling. Anonymous grievance box open weekends. No photo of Logan, no thunderous thank yous. At Uptown Arts Center Room. B opened on set hours, it's if you enter to dance. Sign amended with 1 line, feel free to breathe loudly. At St. Bartholomew's, the ring of keys hung on a wooden hook beneath Rosalind's handwritten note. The door is a rhythm, too. The woman, once in red, gave her glittering dress away to a street dance crew. Grant wired money into an unnamed scholarship fund the donor line left blank. Joey mopped the marble floor each night like writing a poem without words. Marcia taped another note in the break room. If they laugh at you, don't let them borrow your laugh. Logan took beginner classes every Wednesday, standing in the last row, counting breaths. First time, first step, learning that the first step never falls into laughter. And Ava, on nights she needed, went to the small room behind the stage. She set her phone down. She set something else down, a long day, a heavy look, a noisy invitation, then danced a short tanda. When the bandoneon breathed, she breathed. When the music stopped, she stopped. And at every stop she felt Isabel pass like a thin gust of wind. Dance with your heart, the rest always there. The city slowly learned how to listen. Not to the loud things. To the sound of a tray set down without breaking a glass. To the tap of shoes on a floor like a greeting. To silence standing upright in a lit room. And when silence stood steady, everything else. Money, boasting borrowed laughter, stepped back. Into the space cleared, people placed something light yet heavy, old yet new dignity. It isn't bought, isn't sold, doesn't sign its name. It only beats slow steady like a heart. That is how one tango night changed who was watching. Not with a blinding spin, but with the moment someone set down a tray and lifted an entire room. And from that night on, whenever someone asked Ava where she learned to dance, she smiled and pointed to her chest. Here, she said, in the quiet room my mother left behind. Tonight, one tango changed who was watching when silence stood tall, dignity spoke. And for you, what is your tray set down moment, the instant you chose silence on the right side and stepped forward because of your heart? If this story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe. Turn on the bell so we can keep opening the next quiet rooms together.